As American-Israeli hostage Eden Alexander returns home after surviving over 500 days in captivity, Israel does seem poised to follow through with its commitment made last week to intensify its offensive in Gaza.
Over the past 18 months, more than 50,000 Palestinians have been killed, most of whom are women and children. Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib is a native Palestinian and among the millions of Palestinians who have lost loved ones in this conflict. In fact, he has lost 30 family members. He's also the director of Realign for Palestine. He joins us now. Welcome, Ahmed.
Thanks for having me.
So I think before going into the humanitarian proposals that you have in mind, firstly, I just want to express sympathy for the suffering that your family has experienced. And I don't think we should just leave it as you've lost 30 family members. Tell us a little more about your family's experiences.
Well, very sadly, the childhood homes that I grew up in, I grew up in Gaza City in the north, were hit and destroyed early on in the war. My second childhood home in Rafah City in the south was destroyed on December 14th, 2023. And in that strike alone, over 27 of my immediate and extended family members were killed. The total number is 34 of my family members. And I think that just underscores that, sadly, for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, certainly across the world, this has been one of the deadliest chapters in contemporary history. And unfortunately, there's no end in sight for the suffering. It's not just in terms of the loss of life, but it's also the maiming, the suffering, the disability, the fact that the destruction is going to take years to reverse the impact of that. Those who have left have no clear pathway to return, and it's very painful.
What are the conditions like right now in terms of access to humanitarian aid, medical supplies, food? We hear about starvation and other problems as a real possibility for the survivors there. Gaza has been under near constant bombardment now for months and months and months and months. What do you hear about the conditions on the ground? Are there structures even still standing at this point?
Well, it's a complex picture in terms of the availability of aid. Obviously, there are severe shortages. The Israeli military has blocked the entry of humanitarian supplies and aid since March 2nd. So it's been over 2 months. Part of that is supposedly to prevent Hamas from accessing the aid and reselling it and making money off of it. And that is partially true. However, there are trusted and worthwhile partners who are able to distribute the aid, who are able to get some of that to the Palestinian civilians in need. And I think this has been a zero-sum game for some of the war planners in Israel, where it's an all or nothing approach. It's been very clear that there's an attempt to use access to medical supplies and food and basic necessities as a way to pressure Hamas by having the population pressured as well. There are some pockets of the Gaza Strip that have remnants of food and supplies. Unfortunately, we've also seen the proliferation of theft and looting and criminal elements stealing some of that aid and supplies. And I will also add, and I've been very transparent about this, that Hamas itself has been incredibly awful to the people of Gaza by worsening some of the suffering. They've not been willing to really compromise on some of the issues that could maybe bring about some relief for the suffering. So the population, the innocent civilian Palestinian population, are stuck between a merciless, horrendous war effort by the Israeli military and government and a ruthless terror organization with no end in sight for their suffering.
There is, of course, I guess, a third player on that stage, which is the government of the United States, which, and I'm not making partisan point here, because obviously, President Biden was in power, received a lot of criticism from people who are sympathetic to Palestinian suffering for not intervening to ameliorate that suffering. And now we have, obviously, President Trump in power. What do you think of the role that has been played by those administrations since October 7th?
Well, I think the United States has, in some regards, been at a very tactical level helpful in some ways and immensely damaging in other ways. I am a believer in nuance and multiple truths and multiple realities. Yes, the United States has actually supported the Israeli war effort. Yes, the United States has enabled the Israeli war effort, but it's also important to recognize the difference between the two different administrations. The Biden administration, particularly toward the end, did withhold those D9 bulldozers and some of those 2,000-pound bombs, as well as other supplies, as a way to signal its dissatisfaction with Israeli war planners. And I think in an effort to, I think unfortunately people who have every right to be upset with what's happening forget that point and try to make it seem as if there's merely a continuity of the US role in how it supports the current war effort. On the other hand, we've also seen Mr. Trump, President Trump, on the one hand, release a lot of those withheld supplies to the Israeli government. On the other hand, his envoy, Mr. Witkoff, has pressured the Israeli government into accepting the ceasefire that lasted for 50 days, or 52 days rather, earlier in the year. And supposedly, what's happening right now is rumored to be some kind of a division or some kind of a split, if you will, between the Trump administration and Benjamin Netanyahu, whereby Witkoff is signaling dissatisfaction with how Netanyahu is prolonging the war. He doesn't want to compromise. He wants to keep this going to satisfy right-wing elements in the Israeli coalition at the expense of the remaining hostages and at the expense of greater deals that could be struck with the Saudis, with the region, if you will. So lots of questions remain to be answered about whether or not the Trump administration will really split from the Israeli policy in Gaza. So far, what we've seen with the release of Eden Alexander, and I'm glad that he's released. I want all Israeli hostages to be released, just as I want this war to end immediately to stop the suffering. We've not seen any indication that this is really going to lead to any relief for the Palestinian people on the ground in Gaza. And so the US role across the two administrations is quite complex, and it defies the black and white depictions that I think are so ubiquitous across much of the political analysis space.
One more question, then we'll let you go, since you're focused on how to get humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. One thing that came up last year, you remember the pier the U.S. built that immediately detached and was unusable, and has been portrayed as a real boondoggle for the Biden administration, and was recently back in the news cycle for how actually dangerous it was. What is the right way to navigate some of these aid-related questions with, as you said, the not wanting it looted or not wanting it to fall into the hands of Hamas, wanting to distribute it in ways that are safe to the humanitarian aid workers? What are your thoughts on the correct strategy?
Well, let me honestly state the following, that I was a significant and major advocate for the airdrops and even for the pier that the United States did last year. And I will say the following about why I did that. It was beyond simply advocating for a means of delivering aid. The airdrops, for example, and I was attacked, unfortunately, by a lot of international humanitarian organizations, and the airdrops themselves were attacked. What I was trying to prove as a concept, if you will, and I've long been an avid believer that aviation and opening and a seaport in Gaza are going to be part of the Strip's transformation. before October 7th and certainly after October 7th. We went from having the Israeli Air Force having the sole control over the airspace over Gaza, which it still does, to proving that with the right security coordination, you had the air forces of almost 10 nations carrying out massive airdrops with all of their aircraft over Gaza's airspace. This showed that Gaza's airspace is open for business and can be open for business to serve the Palestinian people if security is addressed. Similarly, you had a situation where Gaza's territorial waters through the maritime corridor with Cyprus was open for operation, assuming security was addressed and coordinated with Israel. I want to open Gaza's airspace and territorial waters. So right now, I think we have a codependency on Israel to allow all the supplies to go in and out. And I actually think in the long run, that's not sustainable, not just because of the political pressure that Israel can exert, but from a volume point of view. I mean, think about the reconstruction of Gaza and the vast amount of construction materials you're going to need. This is not going to be sustainable. And getting it through Egypt is also not going to be adequate. So you're going to have to activate maritime corridors. You're going to have to activate the airspace over Gaza. But for the time being, I think it's critical to get the Israeli government to agree to some middle of the road approach to let some aid in, because 2 months of not allowing anything in has really spread severe malnutrition in large pockets of the Gaza Strip. So there are interim solutions, but then there are medium and long-term solutions in which Gaza truly enjoys some level of independence while coordinating to address security issues with the Israeli government.
Ahmed, thanks so much for joining us on Rising.
Thank you.
Next up on Rising, will David Hogg be ousted from a top spot at the DNC? We'll find out. Stay with us.